The Korean Mafia boss asked for divorce 99 times. This time I signed, and his entire empire stood up. The folder landed in front of me the same way it always did. No warning, no conversation, just the soft, deliberate thud of paper hitting mahogany, and then his voice. Cold, final, already bored with the moment before it had even begun. Sign it, Zara. I looked up slowly. Seo Jin-woo was already looking away. Not at me. Never at me anymore. His eyes were fixed on the city below the floor-to-ceiling windows, on the skyline that his family had spent 3 generations buying piece by piece. The boardroom was completely silent. 12 men in expensive suits arranged around the longest table I had ever seen in my life, and not one of them moved. Not one of them breathed too loudly. Because when Jin-woo spoke in that room, the air itself made adjustments. I looked down at the folder. Divorce settlement agreement. Final draft. 99 times. I had pushed these papers back 98 times before today. In private. In hotel rooms. Across our dining table at midnight, when the house was quiet enough to hear how far apart we had drifted. 98 times I had said nothing, and walked away, driven by something I couldn't quite name. Some quiet, patient certainty that the moment I signed, I needed to be ready for what came after. I hadn't been ready. Until now. Somewhere across the city, Choi Yeon-hee was probably already waiting for him. His mother's perfect choice. The woman he had never admitted to wanting out loud, but had never bothered to hide with any real effort either. I had watched her appear at 3 events in 4 months. Elegant, composed, always introduced as a business contact, an old acquaintance, a family connection. Jin-woo had believed I hadn't noticed, or perhaps he had simply stopped caring whether I did. That was the thing about being underestimated for long enough. Eventually the people underestimating you forget to be careful around you at all. Jin-woo finally turned to look at me. Those dark eyes I had once believed held something worth staying for. I brought 12 witnesses this time, he said, because you keep stalling. This ends today. I looked around the room. Some of these men had been at our wedding 7 years ago. Some of them had watched me sit beside Jin-woo at negotiations and family dinners, performing the role of the wife who belonged just enough to be useful. Park Sung-min, Jin-woo's oldest council member, was seated near the far end of the table. He had never fully decided what to make of me. He was watching me now with something careful and unreadable. Jin-woo leaned forward. His voice dropped just low enough that every man at the table could still hear every word. You were a mistake I kept out of loyalty, he said. Sign the papers before I make this uglier than it needs to be. The room went very still. I felt the words land the way he intended them to, like a door being closed on something that had already been dying. I sat with the feeling for exactly 3 seconds. The shame of it, the specific cruelty of being dismissed in front of witnesses as a mistake. And then I reached for the pen. If you have ever been made to feel like nothing in a room full of people watching, drop your city or your country in the comments right now. Because what I did next, I want you to understand every part of it. The pen was heavier than it should have been. My fingers wrapped around it slowly, and someone near the far end of the table exhaled. A short, quiet sound, like relief, like they had all been waiting a long time for this particular problem to be resolved. I pressed the pen to the signature line, and I signed my name. Not Zara Hahn. Not the name I had carried for 7 years inside his family, in his world, in rooms where I was tolerated but never fully counted. I signed my full name. Zara Adayeze Owens, the name I was born with, the name my father gave me before he died and left me the only thing he had that was truly worth something. I placed the pen down carefully and slid the folder back across the table. Jin-woo reached for it. He was already moving on, already finished with this moment the way he was finished with everything that involved me. He opened the folder to confirm the signature, and I watched his face as he read. He frowned. He read it again. His eyes moved to the line where my name sat in clean, deliberate ink. Not Han. Owens. Your legal name, he said. My real name, I replied. Park Sung-min's phone lit up on the table in front of him. He glanced at it and went completely still. A second later, the phone of the man beside him illuminated. Then another. Then 3 at once. Like a slow current moving from one end of the room to the other. Every phone on that table began to glow. Jin-woo hadn't noticed yet. He was still staring at my signature. But I had been waiting for exactly this. My father had tried to explain it simply because he was running out of time for anything else. 3 weeks before my wedding, he had asked me to sit with him. His hands looked like they belonged to someone older, but his voice was still completely his. Your grandfather and Seo Byung-won built something together, he told me. Before the empire, before all of it. They started with nothing and they built the foundation. When your grandfather died, Byung-won honored every agreement between them. When I die, those agreements pass to you. The lawyers have everything. It is already done. I had listened. I had held his hand. I had been 26 and in love and planning a wedding, and I had filed the information somewhere deep and moved on. It took me 4 years inside Jin-woo's world to understand what my father had actually left me. 42% of Seo Group's foundational holding company. Not the visible empire, not the restaurants, the real estate, the security contracts Jin-woo managed publicly. The foundation beneath all of it. The original structure everything else was built on. Jin-woo's father had honored the agreement completely and quietly until his death 18 months into our marriage. Jin-woo had inherited an empire without ever reading his father's personal files, without asking the question that would have changed everything. He had assumed that his father's world was entirely his. He had never thought to check, and I had spent the last 18 months not stalling, preparing. Park Sung-min stood up. In 7 years, I had never seen him rise from that chair without being invited to. He was a man built entirely of protocols and precision, and watching him stand without Jin-woo's permission felt like watching something fundamental briefly fail. Mr. Seo. His voice was controlled, but only barely. We need to stop. Jin-woo looked up. Sit down, Sung-min. Sir. Sung-min placed his phone face up on the table and slid it toward Jin-woo. You need to read this. The message was from the group's primary legal firm, the same firm that had managed my father's estate since before I was born, the same firm that had waited patiently and completely for the day I chose to activate what was mine. Jin-woo read it. I watched every muscle in his face go still. He read it again. Then he looked at me. Really looked. The way he hadn't in years. And I saw the exact moment when the man who had called me a mistake in front of 12 witnesses understood what kind of mistake he had actually made. What is this? Not a question. A sentence that didn't know how to finish itself. That is notification that my signature today triggered the full activation of my inherited holdings in the Seo Group Foundational Trust, I said. My voice was steady, quiet. 42%. Your lawyers have been copied. The Board Oversight Committee has been notified. It is documented, legal, and has been in place since before our wedding. The man 2 seats from Sung-min stood up without a word, then the man across from him. Then 2 more at once, not walking out, not yet, but standing. And in that room, in that culture, among men who had spent careers reading the meaning of every physical gesture, standing up meant the ground had shifted. It meant they were re-evaluating who they were actually sitting across from. Jin-woo looked around the table slowly. I could see it in his eyes, the automatic expectation that someone would sit back down. That one of them would wait for his signal, his nod, his word to reset the room the way it always had been. He had commanded that silence for years. He had built his authority inside it. But the phones were still glowing, Sung-min was still standing, and not one man in that room was looking at Jin-woo anymore. They were looking at me. For the first time in 7 years inside his world, his silence held no weight, and the woman he had just called a mistake was the reason why. Jin-woo pushed back from his chair. Zara, you wanted the divorce, I said. I gave it to you. What would you have done in that chair? Would you have signed or kept pushing those papers back? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. His mother called 4 times in the next 6 minutes. I watched her name appear on his phone each time, and with each unanswered call, I saw something drain further from the way Jin Woo was holding himself. Madame Seo had spent 7 years quietly, persistently making sure I understood my position in her son's world. She had never used loud words. She hadn't needed to. She had worked in the small, persistent ways that certain women work. Comparisons, suggestions, the careful elevation of other options. She had encouraged this divorce the way you encourage someone to make a decision you have already made for them. She had not known about the foundational trust. Or she had known and assumed I would never find the documents. Both possibilities had kept me awake during months I would rather forget. But 6 months ago, my private investigator had handed me something I hadn't anticipated. Not photographs of Jin Woo and Yeon Hee, though those existed. What she had given me was a financial trail. Choi Yeon Hee had been quietly, methodically feeding operational intelligence about Jin Woo's Eastern distribution contracts to the Kwon family. Routing details, timing windows. The kind of information that looked like nothing until you laid 6 months of it end to end and saw someone building a map of his vulnerabilities. She had not been placed in his life by his mother. She had been placed there by someone who wanted his empire to fail. I had been carrying this for 4 months. I had debated what to do with it more times than I could count. Because even when someone is breaking you, you don't stop caring whether something is going to hurt them. But he had brought me into this room. He had said what he said in front of 12 people. He had made his choice completely and publicly. And now I was making mine. I reached into the bag beside my chair and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Before your team contacts Choi Yeon Hee about next quarter's Eastern routes, I said, read what is in that envelope. Sung-min reached for it before Jin Woo moved. He broke the seal, read the first page, and turned immediately to the man beside him. Whatever he said was quiet and fast and made the other man reach for his phone without being asked. She has been feeding your Eastern logistics to the Kwon family for at least 8 months, I said. Financial records, communication logs, and 2 signed witness statements. The silence that followed was a different silence than before. It was not the silence of men waiting for Jin Woo to speak. It was the silence of men who were recalculating everything at once. Jin Woo stood with both hands braced on the table, staring at the envelope, and I watched him understand the full sequence of what had just happened. The divorce he had pushed for 99 times, the signature that activated my holdings, the intelligence sitting in that envelope that only I had thought to gather. The woman he had chosen over me had been quietly, systematically dismantling him. And the woman he had called a mistake was the only reason he still had a company left to lose. Zara. My name in his voice sounded nothing like it had for the last 3 years. It sounded careful, like he was holding something fragile. He had just realized he had been throwing against walls. I picked up my bag. The legal team will manage the share arrangements, I said. I am not here to take your company. What is mine is mine. What is yours is yours. That is all this ever was. You could have told me. Something cracked in the last word. Barely. Enough. About Yeon Hee. You could have come to me. I looked at him one final time. You slid divorce papers across this table and told 12 men I was a mistake you kept out of loyalty, I said. You did not ask me a single question before you did it. You did not wonder what I knew, or what I had been carrying, or who I actually was. You assumed that you were the only person in this marriage with something to protect. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. That was your mistake. I walked to the door. Behind me I heard chairs, more phones, Sung-min giving instructions in low, rapid Korean. The sound of Jin Woo's empire reorganizing itself around the truth of what I had always been. Not because those men suddenly owed me loyalty, but because 42% of a foundational trust demands a very different kind of conversation. My lawyer was waiting in the corridor, grey suit. Complete sentences. A woman who had known my father and had managed this with patience I will never be able to fully repay. When she saw my face, she didn't ask how it had gone. She simply fell into step beside me. "It's done," I said. "It's done," she confirmed. We walked the length of that corridor and I felt something I had been waiting 7 years to feel. Not triumph, not even relief. Something steadier than both. The specific feeling of a woman who has carried something heavy for a long time and finally set it down in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent to everything that had just collapsed on the 43rd floor. I sat in the back of the car and I let myself breathe. I thought about my father in his last year, trying to explain what he was leaving me in the limited time he had left. I thought about all the dinners where Madame So looked at me like a problem she hadn't finished solving. I thought about 98 times I had pushed those papers back. Not from weakness, not from fear of being alone, but from the quiet knowledge that leaving required preparation. That walking away from a man like Jinwoo required that when you left completely, with everything that was yours and with the truth in your hand. My phone buzzed once. Jinwoo's number. I looked at it for a long moment, turned it face down on the seat. Some apologies arrive so late they have already become something else entirely. Not repair. Just the sound a man makes when he finally grasps the weight of what he discarded. Jinwoo would call again. He would have Sungmin reach out through formal channels. He would eventually stand inside the full wreckage of his own choices and understand, completely, without comfort, that the woman he had dismissed as a mistake had been the most important decision he ever made. And he had made it 99 times. I had only needed to make mine once. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been in a room where someone assumed your silence was emptiness, subscribe right now. Drop your city or your country below and tell me the exact moment you knew Jinwoo had already lost everything. Because I read every comment, and this channel exists for every woman who was counted out before anyone thought to count what she was actually carrying. There are more stories coming. Stay with me for all of them.